Dr. Laquanan has appeared on The Doctor's Show on CBS. He is an author, a speaker, a board certified psychologist.
The home is a safe place to talk, that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to feel a certain way. It's okay to talk about emotions.
How can we best support someone that we love who has an addiction?
What I work with a lot of family members is when they're in a high degree of crisis, that we've tried everything, we've come from a loving place, and we're scared that something bad's going to happen. The must know number one is you have to have hope that getting help or treatment truly does work, because you get a lot of family members that are hopeless and feel helpless. And I tell them that there's still things you can do. You can still come from a loving place, but the strategy just has to change.
What motivated you to write this book? Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Brian Laquanan. He is an author, a speaker, a board certified psychologist who specializes in insomnia, family crisis interventions, as well as substance abuse disorders and mental health conditions. Dr. Laquanan has appeared on The Doctor's Show on CBS, Dr. Drew Midday Live, Good Day LA, along with several podcasts, and has written several articles. His book, How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment, a step-by-step guide for mental health and/or addiction crisis, is a strategy guide to help family members with loved ones refusing help or treatment. Welcome, Dr. Laquanan. What causes some people to form addictions and not others?
Okay. Well, great question. That's a question that comes up a lot with the families I work with. And one of the first things I tell people on a genetic level is there is a genetic component with addiction. And and when I work with a lot of families, to me, it's one of the most strongest genetic predispositions. And when there's a family history of addiction, people from there and later generations have a genetic risk factor for addiction. Doesn't mean that anyone with that in that family system can't break free from that and break those patterns, but that's one of the challenges. Strong family history, especially if a parent or both parents are struggling with substances chronically or an addiction, the risk factor of children to develop some type of mental health condition or even some type of dependence on the substance, especially if the people in the household are still not sober and substance are still around, can be very, very complex. So that's one of the areas of why some people struggle with addiction and some others don't. The other are pre-existing stressors or mental health conditions that people turn to for substances to cope. Okay, and substances or any type of these coping mechanisms, whether it be gambling and eating, I tell people all the time, the reason why people turn to their substance of choice or their behavior of choice is because it works, right? That's one of the must-knows that I talk about is they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work. And that's why some people choose alcohol over opiates, opiates over cocaine, is because it works for what it was originally intended. But over time, as they get tolerant, more dependent, it becomes dysfunctional and counterproductive. So that's one way, dependence, and especially like I said in the household, if it all depends on what messages the people get regarding using substances, and if it is a pervasive use in the household and children growing up with that, they just plant these messages and this narrative that it's okay. This is how we deal with things. And so those are some of the major factors that I find with clients I work with as to why they turn to substances or become dependent on substances over time.
Okay, if some people reach for substances because it works, when you say because it works, I'm assuming you mean it works in them being able to escape from whatever they're feeling that they no longer want to feel in that moment.
Mhm. Yeah, and so what I say is it works for what it was originally intended. And so, for example, if someone drinks some alcohol to go to sleep at night, right? It works. If some people will smoke marijuana, so it lowers their social anxiety, it originally will work. If someone engages in some type of stimulant because it helps them engage people more and stay awake, because it works. And that's what I mean by that. That's what originally intended. And what happens that over time is we forget about the other alternatives to attaining that level of effect, and that one becomes our sole tool for using. And then that's what happens. And over time, no longer is one shot of vodka going to do the trick. Now it's two shots of vodka to do the trick. No longer is about one glass of wine to make us feel better. It's going to be three glasses. And so that's what happens. And of course, as they become tolerant, the body gets and mind get dependent on it, and they need more of it, and it also has this counterproductive effect. But absolutely, a lot of the reasons why people turn to substances is to deal with some type of stress, high level stress, and that stress can come in the form of a traumatic event that can deal with anxiety and anger, a way of avoidance, shutting down racing thoughts, and that's one of the things is because, like I said, it works very quickly. And that's why people get attracted to it. And what happens is they don't have other tools. And we know that there are many, many, many other tools, more effective tools to gain that. And they don't realize that it's worsening or exacerbating the symptoms that they're trying to get rid of.
Hmm. Going back to genetics for a moment, I'm curious how much of that is embedded in us just through birth, just through our cells, and how much is environmental, like our upbringing and what we're surrounded by, what we see, and what we classify as normal, or just the way that you're supposed to handle things.
Yeah, it's tough. It all depends. Every issue and person is different. I couldn't tell you exactly a percentage, but both of those factors are very, very influential. Environmental, some people say, well, environmental is more impactful or impressionable than genetics, and genetics can be more. I think there's a combination of both, especially when it comes to substance dependence or substance addiction. So definitely. What I find is definitely if one parent in the household or a family member in the household is chronically using, especially during a child's upbringing, and that's just a normal way of life, and that is definitely heightens the risk. If both parents are engaging in it, that has a definitely a heightened risk. And then environmental could be just if it's normalized that this is what we do. And I believe that there's a really, really sensitive period in one's life, and that's childhood and adolescence. And a lot of what I call imprinting takes place. And if a child grows up in an environment where this is a normal, this is how we deal with things, and especially all the other components that come with someone who's addicted to a substance, whether it be um, tension in the household, way they resolve conflicts, if there's a lot of these heightened symptoms, that's what they role model. And so definitely environmental. There's other risk factors that play in there, but yes, definitely genetics and nurturing or environmental are huge components that could lead someone down that road of being at high risk.
I wanted to kind of cover that a little bit first because I feel like it's important when we are talking to someone or we have someone in our lives who we love that is having this problem with addiction, that we understand them, where the root cause came from, so that we can not get angry about it, and have more compassion.
So your question is what can we do to come from a place of care and compassion, correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, how can we best support someone that we love who has an addiction?
Yeah. Well, absolutely. You use the perfect word. And the way I work with people, first and foremost, is to meet them where they're at. Okay. And one of the things that I talk about or write about is people especially family members I work with, have these misconceptions coming from a loving place though. I've worked in residential for almost 15 years, and you have all kinds of levels of family dynamics or family toxicity. And I would say 99% of the families who are supporting a loved one in treatment, we're coming from a loving place. And I say that just because you come from a loving place doesn't mean it's always the right place or the best place. And so, for example, words that I clarify a lot, well, we were just trying to use tough love, and that is well-meaning, tough love. However, a lot of family members misinterpret that, and I use the word tough love does not equal tough luck. Tough luck can mean we're done with you, be gone. We don't want to see you until you get healthy. We're completely done with you. And I tell family members that's a very, very dangerous slope to be in, is because that family member who's really struggling, who feels helpless and hopeless and feels alone, that heightens their risk factor to continue to go down that road or maybe just give up on trying or even living. And so definitely want to meet the person where they're at, understand coming from a loving place. What I talk about is just because we come from a loving place doesn't mean we can't also have a balance of boundaries. And that's where I see a lot of families is I believe two of the most powerful emotions that perpetuates people to struggle in a family dynamic is guilt and fear. Fear that my loved one may die, fear that my loved one may be um, um, harm somebody else, fear that my loved one may end up in jail. In guilt, a lot of times you find guilt, it can come in many forms or fashion. Guilt is having this feeling of regret of having done or not done something. And so especially parents who were not present in their life for whatever reason, or they got a divorce and caused a lot of tension in the household, or maybe they weren't healthy themselves, they weren't sober, and now they're sober now. And so guilt is a driving factor as to why people or family members don't get the loved one the help that they need. And so, but definitely you can come from a loving place, but still set boundaries. Boundaries are just telling the person clearly of what we're willing to support, not support. And I call that assertive love in contradiction to tough love. And then there's different levels that what I work with a lot of family members is when they're in a high degree of crisis, that we've tried everything, we've come from a loving place, and we're scared that something bad's going to happen. And there's a different level of interventions that we do for people in that level. But absolutely, you talk to them, you understand them, you validate them where they're at and help collaborate with them. That's the first line of interventions that I encourage families, that I work with families as well.
What does that look like exactly? What would be the right timing to do that or the right words? I know a lot of people probably have the right intention, but maybe they don't get a great response whenever they do try.
Well, I think it's important for families to understand planting those seeds early on. And one thing I feel family members are struggling with is communication. And that starts early on. Those questions of course, when you ask a child or teen, how are you doing? Usually we can get a very, very quick response, or what's going on, or how is school? And when you ask usually children or teenagers those questions, you're most likely going to get a one-word answer. They're not going to expand on that. And so that communication foundation has to be set early on when kids are growing up, have these conversations like, hey, tell me the best thing that happened to you today. What was the most challenging thing that happened to you today? What can we do better tomorrow to improve on that? And engaging in conversation rather than these dichotomous one-word answers like, are you doing fine? Are you okay? Yes. And that plants those seeds of talking and creating a very, very safe place. That's what's really important. So if someone's struggling and in their teen years, for example, but there was no room for conversation, things like open dialogue wasn't healthy, maybe the message, whether it be explicit or implicit in the family, where we don't treat mental health or we don't talk about that, emotions are bad, then obviously they're going to feel ashamed to bring up those subjects. And it's very hard to all of a sudden not have open dialogue with someone, and then when we're struggling, all of a sudden ask them to be vulnerable and open up. And so you're gonna be very hard. And so my suggestion for a lot of families is start those conversations very, very early on in their life. Plant those seeds that the home is a safe place to talk, that it's okay to be vulnerable, it's okay to feel a certain way, it's okay to talk about emotions. Because especially nowadays, not that it's any worse or better, but the advent of technology, social media has really, really heightened um, vulnerability, right? There's a lot of good things that come with it, a lot of positive message out there, but there's also a different way of kids or people to isolate and to find people or other people who can validate how they're feeling. If you're feeling depressed and want to end your life, literally you can find, I've worked with clients, you can find people out there who will support them in that endeavor, right? And on the other end, there's a lot of people who want to live life in a zest. And so that's the challenge, is the accessibility to unhealthiness is out there as well. And so open dialogue with kids, bullying is is a heightened level as well. It's very easy to isolate. And so having these conversations with them, planting those seeds early on, are going to be very important. If you don't have that, um, try to meet them where they're at and say, hey, I noticed you haven't been hanging around as much. I really miss that. Or, and I noticed you haven't been playing your sports as much or gaming as much as you used to. Is there any way I could be of help? And those are, is there anything you want to talk about when you plant those seeds that we are a safe place to come and talk to? You'll be amazed of how much they'll open up to you. And so knowing your loved one as well, knowing what works for them is going to be important as well. So
You wrote a book called How to Get Your Resisting Loved One into Treatment, a step-by-step guide for mental health and/or addiction crisis.
correct, yeah.
What motivated you to write this book?
Many things, many things. However, the main impetus to writing the book was these very frequent and thematic questions and struggles that would come up in my work with families. And so just to give you a little bit of a background of where I got this is, so in my private practice and in the telehealth that I work with clients on various levels, whether it be a hospital setting or in outpatient clinic, and then also for almost 15 years, facilitating a support group where family members have loved ones that are struggling at a high level. They're either homeless or they're in a hospital, a psychiatric facility, they're home, don't think have a problem, they're refusing help. And what I found over time with working with all these populations are these questions that would come up from family members. Well, my loved one's suicidal. What can we do? Or they refuse to get help and we're scared. We're not sure how to approach it. And over time, it clicked to me. It's like, wow, and then my responses were the same. And I would get some of these family members saying, hey, is this written down anywhere? Or sometimes I would create slides. Hey, can we get a copy of those slides? And even one family member said, hey, you should put this in some type of a book. And so that planted that seed. And I thought, having worked in the field, that I thought there was something already out there, right? And all of a sudden I'd ask these family members, I said, is there not anything out there for these questions? They said, yeah, but it's little bits and pieces. And it, I even got feedback that, some of the stuff I was saying was a little bit different. It was sort of a similar message, sometimes new messages, but it was just said differently, like the tough love one. The tough love one, like, yeah, I never heard of it like that. Like, tough love can mean tough luck, and you can still come from a loving place, but setting boundaries. And so that's where it come from. It was the answer to the questions that I feel that a lot of families struggle with. And it was a strategy guide to help family members get unstuck and they are in a desperate mode. And so my book was originally designed for these family members who are in crisis mode, that if they don't take action, their loved one is going to have some very, very bad consequences, whether on themselves or other people. And so that's where that book came in. But it can also be helpful for people not in crisis, but people who um, were able to get help. And I talk about different components that I find that differentiates a strong versus a weaker recovery program, and versus many other things. But so that's where it originally came from.
Oh, beautiful. I love that.
Thank you.
It sounds like it was destined to be.
Yeah. And you say that because one of the things I talk about is this was a book that I was in my head for like 4 years prior to the pandemic. And in 2020, as you recall, I remember a very distinct day sitting in this very same place looking out my window here, and I was getting cancellation after cancellation. I'm like, clients just canceling. And then I'm like, what is going on? And it dawned on me as I was staring at my desk. I opened up my Word document and just started typing. I said, this is the time because I had like
Mm,
4 hours to spare that one day. I said, and so I just started typing, and it was all these conversations I was having with this family. So I didn't realize it, but it was already organized in my head. And so for about 6 hours or more, for about 6 weeks straight, it was just regurgitating these conversations. It was already very, very laid out in my head. And so that's where it came about. So yes, it was destined on some level, silver lining in a very, very tragic moment, time in our lives.
mhm. Yeah, definitely. You mentioned before your 25 must knows. I
Mhm.
know we don't have time for all of them, but could you tell us a few and what examples those would be?
Yes, yes. By the way, you're asking some really great questions. You really, these are really, really, these are a lot of the questions of what these family members ask me in terms of what do we do, how do we communicate? And so really, really appreciate those questions. But so the 25 must knows, again, were based on these very, very recurring questions that family members had. And I've had people who were brand new that their loved one just got diagnosed, some family members that were dealing with this for a decade or more. I had people who were very not educated in mental health to clinicians that were well versed and even specialized in addiction that would come to some of these support groups. So it really, really, really told me that there's some big challenge out there, no matter what your level of education, culture, race, age, gender, what have you. And so the 25 must knows were I believe, the most foundational knowledge that anyone should know as they navigate to this process. And so the most important one and the most important tone of my book, the must know number one, is you have to have hope that getting help or treatment truly does work, because you get a lot of family members that are hopeless and feel helpless. And I tell them that there's still things you can do. You can still come from a loving place, but the strategies has to change. And if I may see too, in the title of my book, it says treatment. People sometimes think treatment is the formal treatment and we have to go to a facility. Yes, that is a form of treatment, but treatment can also mean just get them to a place where their only option is to get help. And so sometimes there are some religions that have a very specific modality for getting someone to a better place. And so treatment doesn't actually mean an actual facility, although it can. And that's what it's really designed for these family members, where they need that level of structured routine and monitoring and so forth. They're just at that point, but it can also mean just at a point of getting help. So number one is have hope. Number two, I must know is family members have to release themselves from guilt. I talked about it earlier. Guilt is a very, very powerful emotion. And one way you inoculate that guilt is through an amends process. Amends means to repair. If you weren't present for your loved one early on in life, you be present as you're part of your amends. If you weren't sober during their formidable years of childhood and adolescence, being sober is your amends. And so I get a lot of family members who harbor a lot of guilt, and it's such a powerful obstacle of why they don't get help. Gosh, yes, they were abused as a child and I didn't save them. So, and it creates this very, very powerful power dynamic. And it's amazing how sometimes, the disease will hang that over someone's head. Well, you weren't there for me. Well, you were an alcoholic yourself. So why do I need to get sober? Hey, you left us when we were young kids, and why do you want to come back in our life now? You've probably heard that narrative before, and it's powerful. And a lot of family members can say, you're right. I take responsibility for that. This is how I'm preparing for it. And you have to be able to have that conversation with them. That's the boundary. I'm not going to continue to participate in this more. You're not going to hang that over my head any longer, but I'm being better and I'm going to make changes. I'm going to be here for you. So those are some of the must knows. And then I told you earlier, the reason why people, another big must know is the reason why people can use substances is because it works, right? It simply works. And people don't realize that. And you have to give people options. You can't tell people, I find, you drink anymore. You can't use any substance anymore. I tell them, hey, we're here to just give you options. You can go down that lifestyle, but we're not going to support that lifestyle any longer because we're doing more harm than good. So there's some of the must knows. Obviously, there's 22 more must knows, but those will give you a little bit of a highlight of what those sound like and so forth. So
You are a board certified psychologist, and you could have specialized in anything, but you chose addiction. You also specialize in insomnia, family crisis interventions. Is there a reason why you chose these niches, I guess you would call it?
mhm. Well, again, a lot of it came from just fortuitous opportunity, yet also it on a personal level as well. For example, insomnia. I had a friend that reached out to me who is a physician that specializes in pulmonary diseases, but also insomnia. And after my training, he said, "Hey, you need to get into specializing in insomnia. You know, it's because there's a really big niche there." And so I did. I explored it, but also on that same level, on a personal level, during my one of my graduate years, I was able to experience a severe case of sleep deprivation for about 3 months. And it was a really, really bad place. Severe sleep deprivation, where I was averaging probably 2 hours a night for 3 months. And that wasn't even consolidated sleep. That was racing thoughts, anxiety, racing thoughts was really bad. And had it gone any longer, I'm not sure what would have happened. So experiencing severe sleep deprivation, I could really relate. And people with addiction usually aren't sleeping well. It is usually a predictor for a relapse or use of substance when people are sleep deprived, because a lot goes on during the sleep process that exacerbates mental health and medical conditions. So that was one, an opportunity and experience. The addiction part is when I was training with a psychiatrist, you know, my first month there, he says, "Hey, I'm opening up a treatment facility. Do you want to be a part of it?" I said, "Okay." And so I did, and I was exposed to very acute populations of substance abuse, chronic substance abuse, and mental health conditions. And so that's where I got a lot of my training as well. And yet also on familial levels and so forth, you know, with various mental health conditions or people I know, definitely heightened and colored that experience. And then family crisis intervention was a result of all these families, hundreds and hundreds of families that I find was a very, very important um, element out there, that a gap that's missing out there. So yeah, it was a combination of both, just opportunities that came to me, but also tied into some personal experiences that found me here. So
Speaking of personal experiences, you train and compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. How
correct.
can martial arts help people heal within?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up as well. That is a huge another component of my life that's contributed to healthy living. And so, growing up, you know, um, my parents enrolled me in karate, and as a child, and actually competed in karate fight tournaments as a child. And so that was martial art was instilled early on. And then life came, high school and so forth. We transitioned to competitive tennis, and then about 7 years ago, 8 years ago, um, my daughter started training in jujitsu, and I was watching her from the sidelines, and I said, "Wow, this is something I think I can do." And I had this resurgence of energy. I liked it. I liked the strategizing, the aggressiveness, the mind chess game that's involved with it, the competition aspect of it, and also most importantly, it was an opportunity for me to further bonding with my daughter. And so we actually competed together. My first 2 months of training, and she had been training already for 4 or 5 years. And we were getting a competition. She wanted me to compete with her, and this is just two months in. And so I did what I could to get on par and took private lessons and was just doing everything I can. but I competed and actually did quite well in my first tournament. So, um, first and foremost, again, jujitsu is actually means the gentle art. It's a um, um, has origins in judo, and it was originally designed for a smaller, weaker person physically to be able to manage or defeat a bigger, stronger person with certain tactics of submission, judo throws, um, and it's a great self-defense for kids, confidence builder. But I think martial arts in one way, especially in jujitsu, is it exposes your discomforts. You know, you get a lot of people. I have this series that I've been doing now on Instagram that's called Dr. Brian's Jiu-Jitsu for Mental Strength. And so I've been interviewing a lot of people of how it improves their mental strength and the stories that you get. I have anxiety. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I was assaulted. I was bullied. I'm lonely, you know, or I'm not connected to my body and mind. And so it definitely heals people's because it exposes you to your discomforts, and it also um, helps you be comfortable again with your mind, body, and spirit. And so, and then the camaraderie and the fellowship is really, really invaluable in it and meeting with other people. But I think any martial art, you know, that's a good fit for anyone out there for looking for a next level um, healing and a physical mind and body spirit. I could just speak to jujitsu because that is what I'm heavily invested in, and it's been a life and game changer for me. It's the best shape I've ever been in. It's the clearest I've been in my mind, and I look forward to it every day. And competition is just the next level. So not everyone has to compete. You can do it as in any level, but competition to me is just in line with what I feel like are my needs and taking me to a next level in many ways.
I have two final questions for you,
Sure.
but before I ask them, where would you like to send the listeners and where can people find your book?
Um, you can find me, and I'm assuming you'll probably leave it down below. If I need to spell it, let me know. But it's my website is drbrianliquanen.com. That is my website. You can find out a little bit more about my book. I have an excerpt there, also links there to where you can find my book and all of my social media appearances, you know, on different podcasts, articles I've written, TV appearances. A lot of great topics on there, like dealing with guilt, family dynamics, child trauma, and all these different topics, and of course, addiction. That's one way you can get in touch with me. I'm on also Instagram at Dr. Laquanen, and TikTok at Dr. Laquanen, and YouTube as well at Dr. Brian Laquanen. And so, and then my book, you can find it. The best way to get it is on Amazon. It's in paperback and Kindle form, but you could also get it at a Barnes and Noble as well. But Amazon's probably the best, the most reliable way if you want it fast.
Great, and yes, that will all be in the description below. Dr. Laquanen, what is your number one health tip? So whether that is diet, nutrition, physical, emotional, just the one piece of advice you would like
Mm.
everyone.
The biggest one of all of those, because you're hitting on all the ones. If I just may say, I believe there's four major areas of healthy living, or if we're struggling, we're neglecting one of them. It's the physical, what we do with our body, our mind, of course, our thought process, our emotions. Social is our relationships, that's career, romantic relationships, friendships, familial relationships. And then there's a spiritual part. Spiritual part can be a higher power, doesn't have to be, but spirituality, our spirit can mean a higher, deeper purpose and meaning. And all four of those areas, I believe, accounts for 25% of of our well-being. And um, so attending to all of those are critically important. And when people struggle, they're neglecting one of those. And so my biggest advice, if I was to choose out of all of those, would be change the way we think. A lot of people who are struggling, they've created this certain pattern of thinking. And usually if someone's depressed or anxious, I'm not good enough, I'm not worth it, I'm unlovable, I'm unfixable. And literally changing the way you think, affirming yourself, I'm worth it, I'm enough, I'm good enough, literally can change brain chemistry, changes the way you look at things. I tell people for every negative thought you have, you extinguish that, don't give it any more power with a gratitude, an affirmation, a success. That is the most occurring symptoms that I find when I find people struggling on various levels in my therapeutic work is they have these faulty thinking patterns. And most of the time, these faulty thinking patterns are these self-created beliefs that are misinterpretations of certain events in their lives. So that would be my number one is changing the way you think. There's a concept real quick called neuroplasticity, means we can change, we can heal from our traumatic events if we change certain things, especially the way we think. Our brains have the ability, the pliability to heal no matter what. And we've shown that as human beings, having been here for hundreds of thousands of years, is we're resilient beings and our mind is no exception. So that would be my number one thing.
Very well said. And I'm really happy that you covered the 4 major areas of our health, because that is one question on the list that I didn't get to ask you. So thank you.
By the way, so your listeners don't feel like I have a math issue. So there's 5 areas and it's 20% each. I said 25%. So just in case your listener said, man, he doesn't know his math. So there's the 5 areas: spirit, so physical, mental, um, social, and the spiritual part. Is that 5 seconds? Early in the morning. Yeah. So
I love it. Okay, great. Okay, my last question for you, it's a personal question. You get to choose a number 1 through 100, and that will tell you the question that you get.
okay, 4.
4. Oh, that's my favorite number. What's your guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure. Okay, you hit me with the dietary stuff. I'm, I try to eat healthy and as much as I can, but I'm a big person with chips and I like Mexican food, street taco vendor Mexican food. And so those are my ones. I literally just had street tacos the other day. I have a big competition coming up next week, and I was like, gosh, should I be eating this? But that's my thing. That's my thing. Chips, especially things with cheese in it, and street taco Mexican food are my guilty pleasures.
So crunchy and savory.
Crunchy and savory and cheesy.
Cheesy. Oh, that's great. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Laquanan. This has been really great. I'm excited to share this information with everyone. I know a lot of people are struggling with addiction out there. I've had my own experiences
Mhm,
being on the other side, trying to
mhm,
help others. So
mhm,
that's why, I wanted to have you on, have this conversation to
mhm.
do a small part in helping get the word out. So thank you for writing the book, and thank you for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you so much, Jessica. It's a pleasure to be here, and appreciate what you're doing for all your listeners and continue to spread that message with all of us. So thank you.